infectious diseases, research, medicine, health. Welcome to Outbreak News Interviews. And now, broadcasting from the Outbreak News Skylar Studios in beautiful West Central Florida, here is your host, microbiologist and editor of OutbreakNewsToday.com, Robert Hilleman.
Well, hey everybody, this is Robert, and welcome to Outbreak News Interviews. Now, I recently saw an open letter to, I believe it was Vermont legislators from several years ago. They were at the time considering vaccine legislation, and the letter was from an immunologist named Dr. Tatiana Obukhanch. Not sure if I got that right. Now, the letter was published and resurrected by a website called Health Impact News. Now, in this letter, she makes many claims, and I wanted to get the thoughts of a vaccine expert. So joining me now to dissect these claims made in the letter is Paul Offit, MD. Dr. Offit is the Maurice R. Hilleman Professor of Vaccinology, Professor of Pediatrics at the Perelman School of Medicine at the University of Pennsylvania, and the Director of the Vaccine Education Center at the Children's Hospital of Philadelphia. Dr. Offit, welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Robert.
All right, so in this letter, the author points to a handful of vaccines, including the inactivated polio, DTaP, the hepatitis B, Haemophilus influenza B. And she says that unvaccinated children with these vaccines pose no extra danger to the public than a person who is vaccinated. Is she right?
Well, we certainly are seeing what's going on now. I mean, if, for example, you don't get a measles vaccine, the Clark County, Washington now has an estimated 22% of children who haven't been vaccinated. That group served as a nidus or epicenter for what was an outbreak that then spread not only to those children but into the surrounding community. So, which is to say that you really need to have about 95% of kids protected or immunized so that the viruses don't spread. Polio, you could argue, is the same thing. I mean, we had, for example, an outbreak of polio years ago among an Amish community in the Midwest because other children from other parts of the world had come and visited them, and there were a critical number of children who hadn't been vaccinated with polio. So, not shockingly, these are contagious viruses. They're able to spread from one person to another if those people in whom it's spreading aren't vaccinated. So sure, herd immunity is clearly important, as it would have to be. Measles is a perfect example, actually. We eliminated measles from this country by the year 2000, and it wasn't because we immunized everyone, because by definition, we couldn't immunize everyone because about 500,000 people in the United States can't be vaccinated because they're getting chemotherapy for their cancers or immune suppressive therapies for their chronic diseases. So herd immunity is a real phenomenon. I'm not sure why this particular author denies it.
Well, she points out particular vaccines in this case, like the hepatitis B and the Haemophilus influenza B.
Well, again, we essentially eliminated hepatitis B from this country once we made it a routine vaccine in the early 1990s. And again, we eliminated that virus from children less than 19 years of age, even though not 100% of children were vaccinated. So by definition, there's herd immunity.
Yeah. Okay, so another thing she brings up is a situation of serious adverse events, and she says it's not a rare thing. So I guess my question for you is, how common are serious adverse events, and what exactly is a serious adverse event?
So a serious, can I go back again to that other question?
Sure, of course. Mm-hmm.
There was one thing I was going to say. The only pathogen in which you can say herd immunity doesn't matter is tetanus. Right. That's it. I mean, that's a bacteria that's not transmitted from one person to the next. It's only acquired from soil. 100%, everybody in the world could be vaccinated but you, and you are still at risk. For every other virus or bacteria that's in a vaccine, herd immunity matters. And study after study has shown that. We had a dramatic decrease in polio in this country when only about 40% of people were immunized. So, of course, what you do matters and affects the next person. So I think that her premise is wrong.
Okay.
I'm sorry, could you repeat the next question?
Sure, absolutely. How common are serious adverse events, and what is considered a serious adverse event when it comes to vaccines?
Okay, so pretty much everyone has pain or redness or swelling or tenderness at the site of injection, and sometimes that's associated with low-grade fever. I don't think that's what people mean by serious adverse event. So examples of serious adverse events would be that sometimes people can have a severe allergic reaction to a component in the vaccine, most commonly gelatin, which is used as a stabilizer, less commonly latex. Egg proteins are no longer an issue with influenza vaccine because the quantity of egg proteins contained in those vaccines is 100-fold less than necessary to induce that kind of response. So that's one. That occurs in about 1 per 1.4 million doses. So very rare, but very real, the sort of so-called allergic reaction or response to a vaccine. The yellow fever vaccine can cause, frankly, yellow fever, a severe disease which is occasionally fatal. It occurs in about 1 per 2.5 million recipients. It occurs primarily in those greater than 65 years of age. It's not a routinely recommended vaccine, obviously, for children, but that is a true side effect. Measles-containing vaccine can cause a lowering of the platelet count, which platelets are necessary to help the blood clot, and you can see this sort of showering of petechiae, sort of like broken blood vessels. It's transient. It doesn't ever cause permanent harm. We see it rarely in our hospital. It occurs in about 1 per 30,000 children. The oral polio vaccine was, when we used it, and we stopped using it after 2000, but when we used the oral polio vaccine, the so-called Sabin vaccine, that could cause polio in about 1 per 2.4 million recipients. Again, rare, but again, real, and that's why really we've now gone to the inactivated vaccine, which doesn't have that as a consequence.
Right.
But that's pretty much it. I mean, all the other things that people are worried about, like autism or diabetes or multiple sclerosis or attention deficit disorder or hyperactivity that people fear are a consequence of vaccines, aren't.
Now, the author also claims that the elimination of vaccine exemptions do not resolve the issues of measles resurgence nor prevent reimportation. What do you think about that?
Well, I think we have a proof that that's wrong. I mean, when the California measles outbreak started in Southern California in 2014, it was among a group of generally Caucasian, suburban, upper-middle-class families that had chosen not to vaccinate their children. That served as an epicenter for an outbreak that started in Southern California, spread to 25 other states, involved a little less than 200 children, some of whom were hospitalized. Then those parents got scared of the disease, and so they rushed to the doctors to get measles vaccine. Obviously, the public health community vaccinated the area around it, and the outbreak subsided. So, of course, your capacity to choose not to get a vaccine is directly related to the likelihood that one won't get a vaccine. As a consequence of that outbreak, basically, California passed so-called SB 277, Senate Bill 277, which eliminated their philosophical exemption. Associated with that, immunization rates have gone up, and associated with that, outbreaks went down. So not surprisingly, the more vaccinated you are, the less likely you are to get a disease, and you're more likely to be vaccinated if, frankly, you're compelled to be vaccinated.
She also states in the letter that outbreaks of measles cannot be entirely prevented, even with a nearly perfect vaccine compliance. Does she have a point?
Nope. We first had the measles vaccine introduced in this country in 1963. By the early 1990s, we had a second dose recommendation, and with that second dose recommendation in 1991, we eliminated measles from the United States by the year 2000. Gone. Although we would occasionally obviously see people come in from other countries, like the Philippines or Europe, where measles was endemic, that person had measles. It would never spread from one American child to the next because a critical number of children were immunized. So we eliminated measles, eliminated it, this highly contagious disease, by the year 2000 with a vaccine. So, and that was obviously not by vaccinating 100% of people, because you can't vaccinate 100% of people.
Yeah. Well, the author also goes on to promote the use of immunoglobulins post-exposure for select populations, the immunocompromised, the very young. That's not a horrible thing, is it?
Well, I mean, for people who can't get a vaccine, who are exposed to measles, for example, one could get, measles containing immune globulin. If you're exposed to tetanus, obviously tetanus immune globulin. If you're exposed to rabies immune globulin, sure. Those in selected populations, that's the value. But why would you prefer passive immunity to active immunity? Active immunity means you have memory B and T cells in your body, so that when you then are exposed to these viruses or bacteria, you yourself can make the antibodies that you need. When when you have passive transfer of antibodies, those passively transferred antibodies have a half-life of about 3 weeks and gradually disappear over time. So that when you're then exposed to a pathogen again, you are just as you were before you'd ever been vaccinated. So you need active immunity, not this so-called passive immunity.
Yeah. So basically, her goal in the letter to the legislators, like I said, it was several years ago, but it has resurrected on the internet, is to say that it's unwarranted that parents should be forced to get their children vaccinated before school. So looking at the letter as a whole and its goals, just a general summary thought on it.
Well, I think we're reaching a tipping point in this country. We're seeing outbreaks of measles in Oregon, Washington State. We've seen it recently in California, Minnesota, New York State, upper New Jersey. It's a few hundred children. Last year was a little less than 400 children. Get it to a few thousand children, you'll start to see children dying of measles again.
Yeah.
It's a dangerous game we play, and I think that the question then becomes, because there's always sort of the balance between a parent's right to do as they see fit and the responsibility that a parent has to the society as a whole, as well as to their child. And I don't think, frankly, it should be your right in this country to allow your child to catch and transmit a potentially fatal infection. And I think, unfortunately, more children are going to have to suffer, and more children are going to have to die before we actually realize that that's true.
Yeah. Can I ask you one more question that has nothing to do with this letter? FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb came out on CNN, I think, the other day, and he said it's getting to the point where the feds may have to move in because the states aren't handling vaccination issues. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's a republic, and I think I think although Dr. Gottlieb's comments are certainly well-intentioned, he's certainly right on the money that this is we're getting to the point of a crisis, and the government certainly does need to step up. I think the government, unfortunately, has to be state governments. This is where the rubber meets the road. This is where philosophical or religious exemptions occur or don't occur. And I think now you're seeing, Vermont, for example, is interested in eliminating its religious exemption. California just eliminated its philosophical exemption. Washington State is now starting to cut back or to look to cut back. And I think that's all good. But it is the state's issue. I can't imagine this would ever be a federal issue.
Yeah, good. And I concur with that 100%. Well, thanks once again, Dr. Paul Offit, for bringing clarity to this very, very important issue. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Robert.